specific assistance on the ground as far as food, humanitarian, probably a little bit maybe in the future if things continue to drag down. But right now, I think the assistance that they need is the issue of the no-fly zone. There is a serious fear that Gaddafi, as a last resort, might end up using whatever left of his air force or called some mercenary pilots to come and either bomb the cities or bomb any moving military support that may go to Libya.
Okay, let's talk about that no-fly zone, because John McCain, he's all for that. He said that this is certainly something that needs to be looked into. Let's hear what he had to say about that.
We think that there should be a no-fly zone established over Tripoli in Libya so that helicopters and airplanes will be stopped from massacring people. We think that there should be a provisional government set up in Libya that we would support with material assistance if necessary.
I mean, do we have proof that Gaddafi is using this airspace to attack his people? And surely
it was clear that there are some pilots that they ditched their planes in the desert and escaped because they were asked to go.
But it hasn't been used yet, has it?
It hasn't been used. Fixed wings haven't been used, but it was very clear that there was some choppers have been used.
So this is the what-if scenario.
And there is a fear that also that he may call for some mercenary support, importing some other mercenary from other countries. So we want that to be nullified.
And how? I mean, if you going for a no-fly zone, that suggests some sort of military intervention. We've got Joe Lieberman also calling for the same. Speaking during a visit to Cairo on Sunday, independent US Senator Joe Lieberman said the US must support the Libyan opposition in their struggle against Gaddafi. He said, quote, "We've got to recognize the opposition provisional government as the legitimate government of Libya, and that we ought to give that government certainly humanitarian assistance and military arms." Is military arms the way to go?
First, I would like to expand about what McCain said. It should not be just over Tripoli. It should be over the space of Libya. So it will cover any incoming flights that may be bringing mercenaries from other places, because he may use Air Force not just to bomb Libya, but to go back and bomb other cities in the eastern part of the country. As far as military, I don't think support. People in Libya, they don't need boots on the ground. They need the international support. They need the international community to send a clear message to whoever left with this regime that
because it would be disastrous, excuse me interrupting, particularly for the US, wouldn't it, if there was any type of military intervention? The opposition forces have already said
the worst case,
that's the last thing we need.
Right. The worst case scenario, in my own opinion, the worst case scenario, if there need to be boots on the ground, it should be from Arab and Muslim countries, countries like Egypt, countries like Turkey. These are two countries that have historical relationship with Libya, and if there needs to be an intervention to save the people there, that these two countries, Muslim countries, should be the only countries, and Muslim countries should be the countries that involve. But I don't think any Western forces of any shape will be any helpful.
Fadil Lamin, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, that's all from us here in Washington for the time being anyway. It's back to you in Doha.
Thanks, Jane. Tunisia has a new Prime Minister, Al-Beji Qaid al-Sebsi. He succeeds Mohamed Ghannouchi, who resigned on Sunday. There had been renewed street violence in the capital, Tunis, prior to his departure. Nadim Baba reports.
A surprise announcement as Tunisia's interim president names a new Prime Minister.
At this critical moment, in order to maintain our national interest and to ensure that the state is up and running with all its institutions, I requested Mr. Beji Qaid al-Sebsi to assume the office of Prime Minister, and he thankfully accepted this responsibility.
Al-Beji Qaid al-Sebsi is 84 and a former foreign minister. He served under Tunisia's post-independence leader Habib Bourguiba and under President Zine al-Abidine Ben Ali. His appointment came hours after interim Premier Mohamed Ghannouchi unexpectedly stepped down.
I am not prepared to be the person who takes decisions which result in the loss of life.
The move comes at a tense time for Tunisia. Sunday saw new clashes on the streets of the capital. Officials say at least 5 people have died during street protests since Friday. Mohamed Ghannouchi took over as premier on the 14th of January after President Ben Ali fled to Saudi Arabia following weeks of protests. Critics say that since the Jasmine Revolution, there's not been real reform, and Ghannouchi's replacement is unlikely to change that.
He's out of touch, he's out of time, he's belonging other generation. What the Tunisian youth need today, who someone will be able to represent them, who someone will be able to respond to their legitimate demands.
Mohamed Ghannouchi has repeated the government's pledge to hold elections by mid-July. But almost 200 people have been arrested over the weekend. It's not clear how far the new Prime Minister can quell the anger on the streets. Nadeem Barber, Al Jazeera.
And the crisis in Tunisia has claimed another victim, albeit a diplomatic one. French Foreign Minister Michel Alliot-Marie has resigned after weeks of pressure over her links to the former President Ben Ali. Andrew Potter reports.
A happy holiday in Tunisia for French Foreign Minister Michel Alliot-Marie. But the break she took in December and the last weeks of President Ben Ali's rule are unlikely to remain fond memories. Alliot-Marie's been forced to resign for this, the latest in a series of scandals she's been involved in.
Avec le Premier ministre François Fillon.
With the Prime Minister, François Fillon, we have decided to reorganise the ministries that deal with our diplomacy and our defence. Alain Juppé, a former Prime Minister, a man of experience who has already carried out the job to unanimous acclaim, will be Foreign Minister.
She's not the only French minister to take advantage of questionable free holidays. Prime Minister François Fillon took his family on a New Year's holiday to the Nile resort of Aswan, courtesy of Egypt's soon-to-be deposed President Hosni Mubarak. Alliot-Marie became pressured after it emerged she travelled to Tunisia on a private jet, owned by a businessman with alleged ties to Ben Ali, weeks before he was pushed from power. But with growing turmoil in the Middle East, the timing couldn't have been worse. Both politicians were hammered in the French press, which then took aim at an unpopular president.
It goes back a long time. It's not only Michel Alliot-Marie. The whole French foreign policy is in disarray, and we can date it to Nicolas Sarkozy's arrival to power.
Alain Juppé becomes foreign minister again after holding the post in the mid-90s under Sarkozy's mentor Jacques Chirac. Sarkozy will be hoping the reshuffle will help stop the scandals which are severely damaging his chances of re-election next year. Andrew Potter, Al Jazeera.
The unrest is also continuing in many other parts of the Middle East. In Oman, at least 2 people were killed in clashes between protesters and security forces in the city of Sohar. Tear gas was also used on the demonstrators in the industrial city. 8 others were injured. Witnesses say at least 1,000 people had gathered to demand political reform. Earlier, my colleague Shuli Ghosh spoke to Jackie Spinner, a journalist who was in Sohar when the clashes took place. She asked her what she'd seen.
It's gotten a little quiet after the sun has gone down, and what we understand is that a delegation from the government has arrived in Sohar to try to meet with organizers and discuss their demands. But, you know, the situation was very tense throughout most of the day today. It morphed from a demonstration, which is what it started out yesterday, into a riot. Serious clashes between the police and the demonstrators this afternoon.
And tell us more about the demonstrators' demands and the government response to them. They're after jobs, better salaries, and end to corruption?
Yes, that's correct. Many of the university students in Sohar are concerned that when they graduate, they don't have jobs, even though there are companies in Sohar who are in a position to hire them. They don't think that they're getting enough work. And so that's where a lot of that discontent stems from. Like some of the other countries, a few of the other countries in the region, nobody in Oman is calling for a regime change. Everyone is very satisfied with the Sultan here, but they are concerned about some of the ministers, and they're concerned about jobs and inflation and economic issues that are keeping a lot of people down.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned the loyalty to Sultan Qaboos. He has made some announcements, hasn't he, about an increase in monthly allowances for students. Has that gone down well or not had an effect?
Well, it was just announced this morning, so I don't know if many of the protesters in Sohar even had time to digest that news. But he has been very responsive. There was a big demonstration in the capital here in Muscat last week, and immediately following that, he announced some of the concessions. So he appears to most Omanis to be dealing with this situation in a very proactive way.
Jordan's Prime Minister is promising to introduce new political reforms after the opposition threatened more demonstrations. It comes as supporters of King Abdullah held a show of solidarity in the capital, Amman. The rally follows weeks of nationwide protests by the opposition. Its leaders say the country's pace of reform has been too slow. Thousands of people marched through the capital of Bahrain in a demonstration against the monarchy. Protesters have rejected the king's appeal for dialogue and called for him to step down. The impasse is entering its third week. The demonstrators' other demands include free elections and the release of more political prisoners. Aides for the Arab League Secretary-General Amir Moussa confirm he intends to run for the Egyptian presidency. We'll have the latest from Cairo in a moment.
Taken stolen goods, and he's now dumping them onto the world without any sort of consideration for consequences.
From people making the news.
If the North will be saved a lot of trouble, I think it is important that they should come together.
To those it affects.
We do accept that there was very bad mistakes made in our banking area.
Behind the headlines.
Most South Koreans are not interested in reunification.
Is the inside story. At this time on Al Jazeera.
Afghanistan is faced with a huge challenge.
Relations have gone really sour between us and our allies.
We have inflicted considerable damage on the enemy.
The people who make international headlines.
Ultimately, the truth will out.
They want to stop this publication of information that embarrasses them.
Make time for Sir David Frost. Frost over the world. At this time on Al Jazeera.
Welcome back. The top story on Al Jazeera. The Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi has told a Serbian television channel that he's staying in Libya. In his latest interview, Gaddafi repeated his claims that foreigners and Al-Qaeda are to blame for the unrest across the country. He also said the United Nations sanctions against him are null and void, and he warned he will crush the opposition. Reports from western Libya say troops loyal to Gaddafi are preparing for a counter-offensive in the city of Azawaya. The city centre is currently in the hands of anti-government forces. Now, as the violence continues, foreign governments are pulling their citizens out by whatever means possible. In a daring rescue, 2 German planes landed in secret and evacuated 132 people from the Libyan desert. And the British military has undertaken 5 missions in the last 24 hours, rescuing more than 300 people. Harry Smith looks at how the first covert operation took place.
British oil workers arriving in Malta after being rescued in a military operation shrouded in secrecy. Details are still sketchy, but it's believed 2 British Air Force transport planes entered Libyan airspace without permission. The British refused to reveal exact locations, but it's believed an airfield at Nafura was used to rescue 150 stranded oil workers. Soldiers from the elite SAS regiment were apparently on board, and the evacuees were then flown to safety in Malta. And in the last few hours, the British Ministry of Defence have confirmed that 150 civilians have been evacuated from other areas in Libya.
It was scheduled to be 65, but in the end there was about 130 got on.
Really?
Yeah. And we were sitting in the aisles, it was very cramped, but we were just glad to be out of there and getting on the flights.
The British, along with other governments, have also sent warships to Tripoli and Benghazi in attempts to bring out their citizens. But it's thought more rescue missions will be needed to airlift hundreds more oil workers stranded in the south.
As I said, there's still people in the desert, so I can't say too much. I can't say where I came from, etc., etc. Because the guys down there are still doing an excellent job to gather all the guys together and get them evacuated.
The Foreign Office here in London has come in for severe criticism for what's perceived to be its slow response to the plight of Britons trapped in Libya. An official I spoke to a short time ago declined to